Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, many thanks to everybody that watched my previous video. Interestingly enough, one of the things I did notice was that the comments, not one guilter commented. Now, when I first started looking at the Luke Mitchell case, Jodi Jones case, I did have people get in touch saying, you know, you're deluded. The guy was found guilty. The evidence all stacked up against Luke. Not one of them. So obviously, it's nice to see that the calls for an independent investigation into what's going on is hopefully beginning to gather pace. A very good friend of mine who unfortunately passed away back in August of 2020, the dude, Eric Ose, he used to often use the expression, keep it classy for Brendan Dassey. For those of you that have seen Making a Murder, you'll know who Brendan Dassey is. He's the nephew of Stephen Avery. And I've had the great pleasure of chatting on many an occasion with both Pete Dassey, that's Brendan's dad, and all the great supporters of Brendan Dassey. Yeah, keep it classy for Brendan Dassey. So I would have to say that the first thing I have to say is there's a reluctance to give Jane Hamilton any further publicity, to do a video about her complaint. Because let's face it, that's what journalists crave. They crave attention. They crave publicity. It's a very competitive market, journalism. And of course, we found out in the case of Stephen Avery Making a Murder, just how appalling some of the journalism is. They simply parrot everything that they're told, and they simply parrot that to the public. And I would say that we like to think that here in the UK, we're above that. We've got better journalists than that. Well, we have got some good journalists, but just like America, they've got some good journalists, but they've got some appalling ones. And we've got some appalling journalists. And, following, obviously, the appalling murder of Jodi, there was a lot of media suspicion of Luke. Obviously, we had the trial and then the sentence, and then everybody just accepted that. There were very few people that actually questioned whether they'd got the right person. And I was one of those that quite happily accepted, yeah, we've got the right person. That's great. It was a mixture of, it's great that we've got somebody locked up for it, but very disturbing that, a fellow 14, 15-year-old would do such a thing to his girlfriend. Very, very disturbing. And it's just like the Stephen Avery attack on Penny Bernstein, which of course was completely false, for which Steve was sentenced to 32 years, ended up doing 18. One of the things that they did to Steve was to present such a horrible crime and then put this person up as, this is the person that did it. He's this horrible, horrible person because he did this horrible, horrible crime, which seems to make sense, except it was Gregory Allen. It wasn't Stephen Avery. But it is just like this sort of situation, isn't it, where the heinousness of the crime is so bad that we're disturbed by the information that came out. We're disturbed about this devil worshipping and all this kind of stuff, and I'm just glad to see that, somebody of that ilk is off the streets, locked up behind bars where he belongs. Except it's forensically impossible for Luke to have done it. And as we're discovering with more and more information coming forward, we really do need this independent inquiry. We don't need another rubber stamping of bogus evidence. And the fact that 100 pieces of evidence were either destroyed or in the process of being destroyed And as I say, some of the latest developments are really, really disturbing. And the other thing that you find with guilters, particularly journalistic guilters, and we had the same with Dan O'Donnell and Ken Kratz and everybody in the Stephen Avery case, hiding behind the family, saying, "Please don't look into this case. You're offending the family." You know, what's offensive to the victim? It's putting the wrong person behind bars. And to be honest, and I know this might sound a bit harsh, but do you really want people who have suffered, the victims' families, do you want them being put in charge of what happens with regard to, you know, any future relief of the person that's been convicted? You know, I mean, you know, as far as I remember, as I say, with Mike Holbach, you know, saying that, you know, Brendan Dassey should have taken the plea deal. You know, he should have been saying, you know, lock the guy away for years, or better still, execute him. You know. Anyway, we're digressing. As I say, they hide. You know, they hide behind the victim and the victim's family, and say, you know, you are just so offensive by looking into this. You know, it's a terrible, terrible thing that you're doing. You know, you need to apologize. You know, have you ever thought about the victim's family? Yeah. Well, yeah, we think about the victim all the time, and the fact that in both cases you've got the wrong person. There's no greater insult to either Teresa Holbach or Jodi Jones. The other thing I'd like to point out is that, as with all truthers that I know, we don't wake up every morning thinking to ourselves, I know what I'll do. I'll try and undermine the legal system in Wisconsin, or the legal system here in Scotland or in the UK. You know, that's not what truthers are about. We're not here to try and undermine anything. We're trying to shore up a conviction, and if it's a wrongful conviction, to get it overturned. And that's why you need inquiries into these things, because when, you know, the whole standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. When there is so much doubt, you need to investigate, and you can't have the cops investigating themselves, because you know what's going to happen. Anyway, as I say, we don't wake up every morning thinking, how can we undermine the system? I've got an article set up for you. It's an article from last year, about March of last year. As I say, I'm very reluctant to give Jane Hamilton any publicity, but I feel that this is something that I want to look back again. I can't remember covering it at the time, so well, in fact, I can't remember reading this at the time, because I probably just looked at the headline and thought, what a load of absolute tosh. Anyway, as I say, this is Luke Mitchell. Reaction has been a pantomime, and I've been cast as the villain. I can't help thinking of the the cartoon series, the Wacky Races. Is Jane Hamilton the Penelope Pitstop of this? Our columnist, Jane Hamilton, says the public's true crime obsessions, like the Luke Mitchell documentary, set dangerous precedents for trials and verdicts. Now, what's really bizarre is she's talking in the sort of third person, but she's wrote the article. This past week has felt like a bit like a pantomime, where I've found myself cast as the villain of the piece. Cries of boo have been resounding in my ears, while I half expect someone to shout, "Oh no, he isn't," at me in the street. So she's not had anybody approach her in the street, say anything to her. Cries of boo have been resounding in my ears. I think I know what the problem there is, Jane. She carries on, standing up against a court of public opinion on the back of a very biased television documentary. Oh, right. The TV documentary is incredibly biased, but your reporting of the case, no bias whatsoever. Okay, we get it. Yeah, yeah. Has seen all manners of slurs, vitriol, and downright rudeness slung my way across all forms of social media, telephone calls, and emails. Can I assure you, she doesn't show any of this in any of this article whatsoever. Calls for my sacking. Let's see let's see this. Resignation and demands for apologies have been winging their way to record towers every day. Well, let's see them. No. Where are they? Don't exist. Why? What heinous crime have you committed this time? Well, I dared to speak out against something I believed was wrong. Oh, but and still do. No, maybe there's time, Jane. At times, over the past 7 years, it has felt like I was the lone voice in the wilderness. Sorry, over the last 7 days, it has felt like I was the lone voice in the wilderness, while all around me were the baying mob were calling for my head, while simultaneously declaring a convicted killer was innocent because the telly said he was. The furore over Luke Mitchell documentary, Murder in a Small Town, on Channel 5 has not died down. And I guess when I pulled no punches in this column last Saturday in showing my contempt for the one-sided narrative shown on screen, I became public enemy number one. Where's all these letters? Where's all this social media stuff, Jane? At least I was to the Facebook and Twitter army who screamed the media were responsible for Mitchell's guilty verdict while ironically believing a documentary that declared him innocent. Media storms surrounding trials and verdicts are not new, but the rise of true crime and our obsession with it is setting dangerous precedents. From podcasts to serious podcasts, I presume, such as the one about Adnan Syed. And guess what? Adnan Syed, innocent, proven innocent, well, certainly released. And we hope it won't be too long before Stephen Brendan are similarly acquitted. From podcasts to series such as Making a Murderer, the growth in the genre is inescapable. But are we risking the very foundations of our justice system for shows that are often very simplistic and omit key information that gets in the way of telling the story visually? I would refute every little thing that you've said there, Jane. Take, for example, Making a Murderer. It is 20 hours long. It goes through the entire cases. It shows you exactly the efforts that Kathleen Zellner is going to and exactly the efforts that the state are putting to try and block her. Now, I realize that Murder in a Small Town was only a 2-hour documentary, but we do have a whole book, Innocence Betrayed, by Sandra Lane, that details everything about this case and what's wrong with it. And the simple fact is that if you've got a guilty verdict, that guilty verdict has got to be able to stand up the day of the guilty verdict, 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later. That guilty verdict still has to stand, because if not, then that person is potentially innocent. Investigating possible miscarriages of justice or unsafe convictions is something journalists and broadcasters have done for years. Well, that's exactly what Making a Murderer is. It's done by journalists and broadcasters for years, and in some cases, they have uncovered or exposed appalling injustices. Correct. So what are you complaining about? The Daily Record has been a standard bearer for many such cases. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to compose yourselves and get back on your seat, having fallen off your seat in hilarity at that particular, the standard bearer. Right. Anyway, let's carry on. The system gets it wrong at times. Nothing is perfect, but you'd hope that when watching these shows, the public would look at both sides and come to a sensible conclusion. Jane, we were fed the same BS that you were fed. It's taken you a bit longer. It's taking you far too long to realize it. It seems incredible that people will believe things they read on Facebook, or that a documentary must be right over highly skilled lawyers. Lawyers? Jane, let's be honest about this, right? There's lies, damn lies, statistics. Then there's your politicians and your lawyers. They are trained in lying, right? On both sides presenting the facts of a criminal case. In Luke's case, this was over more than 40 days, presided over by a judge and decided on by a jury who were carefully instructed not to look at the media. You're dealing with human beings, Jane. Of course they were influenced by the media. How could they not have been? And the fact that the police actually went to the press and said, unprecedented, that journalist was telling us in Murder in a Small Town, unless he's lying, the police coming to him and saying, we've got the right person. You need to help us out on this, is what they're saying. Who were carefully instructed to look at the media, but to decide only on facts heard in court. And again, not every fact was heard in court, as we've discovered. It is an anomaly that 4 appeal attempts have been knocked back. Countless attempts by journalists, including yours truly, to investigate it as a possible wrongful conviction case, and all reaching the same conclusion as the jury. Does that count for anything? Jane, not when it's you. It would appear not. Not when a TV show had 2 ex-detectives who came across as more Scott Crod than line of duty. Well, yeah. And so that's again the other thing that the guilters will do. They will start hurling abuse at people because they're losing the argument. Good one, Jane. Tell the viewers they don't believe police have the right man. When the family of as I say, here we get on to the hiding behind the family. When the family of the victim expressed their distress at the TV show, it seemed to enrage the mob and didn't stop the clamour for what his supporters see as justice. Names of innocent people were tossed into the public domain and labelled suspects without a care for common sense, decency, or even fear of legal ramifications. Anyone who called balance and fairness was drowned out by the screams and shouts of those wanting heads on a platter. A petition calling for a review is unlikely to be heard. It's doubtful a new appeal can be launched unless new evidence comes to light, and Mitchell's team have been looking for 17 years and have come up short. Well, yeah, like I said, if you're going to convict somebody, they've got to be guilty, not just on day 1 or year 10 of their sentence or year 20 of their sentence. It's got to be beyond doubt. There is so much doubt in this case. And then, of course, meanwhile, a heartbroken family have had their pain stamped on and a victim has been forgotten. Her name is Jodi Jones. Well, you'll certainly not find any of the truthers forgetting. As I say, pretty appalling stuff. I do apologize for sharing that. As I say, it's not my intention to give bad journalists any more publicity, but one of the interesting things is that just after Murder in the Small Town, the one thing that I did do was try and reach out. I was alerted to the articles by Jane Hamilton. Reach out, try and make contact, say, would you like to come on and have a conversation, a sensible conversation about the case? You hear nothing. And in fact, there was another guy that wrote an article. I can't remember his name, but he just blocked me on Twitter. First time I've ever been blocked. Even Ken Kratz didn't block me at first. As I say, that if you're hearing cries of boo and you're expecting people to to challenge you, I would suggest it's your own guilty conscience, because that you have done your utmost to try and impede the actions of the brave truthers in trying to at least get some sense out of this case. As I say, we don't wake up every morning trying to undermine any systems, But when we see systems that are completely bogus and false, and journalism which is quite frankly appalling, then yeah, we have to point that out. I'm afraid we do. And in your case, it's I wonder if, a bit like in the film Withnail and I, when Danny refers to holding on to an ever-rising balloon, you never know when to let go. And I suspect with Jane, you've kind of dug yourself into this hole. You're holding on to this balloon, this trying to convince everybody around you he's guilty, he's guilty, he's guilty, and you're clearly losing the battle. And you're afraid to let go of that balloon. Don't. Come over to the right side. We're nice people. You know, as I say, we keep it classy for Brendan Dassey. We're not nasty and aggressive, and vengeful. You know, just just let go of that ever rising balloon and realize that, you know, as I say, the you, like all of us, were fed the same information following, you know, leading up to the trial of Luke, the trial itself, and then the conviction of him and the sentencing. We were all fed the same stuff. And as I say, there was a sense of relief that somebody like that was off the streets. And unfortunately, you know, our fears are heightened so much that we have this hatred of this person who's been presented as the perpetrator of the crime. It's a heinous crime. It's a heinous person. Makes sense. Except when you've got the wrong person, and then you use the heinousness of the crime as a way of disliking that person, of hating that person. You know, is it a case of we're the truthers? And in fact, you're not just guilters, you're haters. You hate Luke Mitchell. You hate anybody that wants to try and get to the truth of the matter. You as I say, Jane, don't feel bad about this. Yes, I think it's your guilty conscience that's saying that you're being pursued by people who you present no evidence of, calls for your sacking as a journalist. You know, dare I say it, people? You know, Jane Hamilton, as a person, I don't know anybody that's got anything, you know, disrespectful to say about her. But I'm afraid, as a journalist, Jane, you're not doing a very good job. You know, and if anything, since The Murder in the Small Town came out, you know, the number of people whose eyes have been opened has increased, and there's those few left, such as yourself, totally blinkered, holding on to this balloon. As I say, just let go. There's nothing at all to be ashamed about, that you were duped the same as everybody else was. There's no shame in that whatsoever. We were all duped. I say, when it was announced that Luke Mitchell had been found guilty and then sentenced, everybody, big sigh of relief. Thank goodness for that. But look where we are now. As I say, if you're going to sentence somebody to life in prison, it's got to be that conviction stands up, not just on the first day of being convicted, but after looking at the case, and as I say, all we're saying is, look, we want an independent inquiry, and that's all that Luke Mitchell's wanting, and that's all that Stephen Avery's wanting. You know, all these people that want the case investigated further. If they were guilty, they would not want it investigated further, because they know that there would be more evidence turns up of their guilt. Contrast that with evidence being destroyed. I do apologise for my Santa shirt and my very festive Green Bay Packers jersey. Hope that hasn't offended your eyes too much. I'd like to wish everybody, obviously, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, wherever you may be, and hope, obviously, in 2023 that we continue to see innocent people exonerated, likes of the Innocence Project over there in America, doing a great job. A friend of this show, Mark Godsey, who obviously wrote a book about the Stephen Avery case, and not to be surprised by some of the stuff that's going on. He recently had a guy released 4 years after being convicted. That was pretty good going to get somebody done that quickly. As we've seen in the past, some of these cases take decades to unravel, and it's only down to the hard work of truthers that just want to know the truth, despite all the hindrances of those who would prefer us to just look the other way and just ignore it, just forget it. Please don't open up that can of worms. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and I'm sure we'll see you again soon. I'm looking forward to the Speedway season next season, of course, but in the meantime, as I say, hopefully we'll get more movement on both Luke, Brendan, and Stephen's cases. Bye for now.